What is going on, guys, and welcome to another ProGuides video. It's your host Sergeant Frost, and today we're talking about Sova. More specifically, how you can best play him in order to carry your rank games by making every jet look like a smurf. Sova is an incredibly impactful supportive agent, and he's crucial on almost every single map. So if you want to learn the most played agent in professional play, and find your way to the top ranks, I suggest you strap in like in this video and get ready to take notes. Let's start off by talking about his signature ability, his recon bolt. We all know what it does, but for those of you who don't, it's an arrow that scans the environment upon landing and reveals any player within its line of sight. It can be broken, and it can also be dodged by smoking yourself off or otherwise making sure none of the 3 sonar scans get you. Sova can shoot this bolt with his bow, which he can aim as he likes, decide the arrow speed, and he can even make it bounce up to 2 times. That's the extreme basics. You shoot the arrow, it reveals the enemies, and it gives your team an easier time taking map control or entering a bomb site. But there are, of course, some more advanced things which you'll want to consider as you become a better Sova. First of all, and I want to get this misconception out of the way right away, and that's lineups aren't everything. There's a great amount of people that believe Sova is all about knowing lineups and remembering the right spots and where to aim, but that's not true at all. Sova is like 90% about timings and maybe 10% lineups. Most darts you should use can easily be thrown on the fly, and knowing when rather than how to shoot them is so much more important to playing a good Sova. You don't become a good Sova from watching 20 minutes of arrow content every day. Instead, focus on what your utility is actually achieving and think about how and when you can best use it to get the most value. And if you want to learn some lineups just to have a baseline, make sure to learn a couple essential darts on each map, like for example this dart on Ascent B, and stay far away from ones that seem pointless or that have those pixel perfect double bounces. Then, instead of spending 2 hours watching dart guides on YouTube, spend half an hour or so figuring out how darts travel with different speeds, bounce settings, and more, so that your on-the-fly darts in-game are more fluid and consistent. And of course, if you need some help with that or more personal guidance on how to level up your game, make sure to visit us at ProGuides.com, where our Radiant and Immortal level coaches are more than happy to help you become the player you were meant to be. Every session is tailored to your individual needs as a player, whether it's to build your fundamentals or to master an agent. So if that interests you, make sure to click the link in the description to get started. Alright, now time for some dart tips. First of all, on defense, using recon darts at the start of the round is something you should almost always be looking to do. Your dart refreshes after 40 seconds already, so if you play it right, you can definitely use it at least twice a round. Saving your dart is often pretty pointless, as even if you save it for the perfect moment, you probably would have waited out the 40 seconds already anyway. So to get the max value out of your recon bolt, you should be looking to use many of them in a round. Better to shoot 3 darts which are all 6 out of 10 than to save your darts for a while and only ever use that one that's say 8 out of 10. On attack, though this absolutely isn't the case, you pretty much need that dart in order to hit a site, at least on most maps. And if you waste it right before your team wants to execute, you can be the one explaining to your jet why you didn't dart for him. Of course, if your team is playing slow and you want to gradually take map control, then yeah, using an early dart is great and helps to maximize your kit. But if you're on attack, be careful, you don't want to disappoint your jet. When it comes to the actual darts you throw, the most important thing is that your dart needs to incite chaos, or at the very least give good info. This means that you generally want to dart when your opponents are preoccupied and can't afford to look at nor away from the dart. On attack, this means that you shoot your dart right before or as your teammates make contact, which forces your opponents to either turn their back to the dart and get pinged over and over, or instead shoot the dart, meaning your teammates are able to run out uncontested. The same concept also applies to defense. If you dart right as people enter sight, especially on maps like Breeze for example, you can really stop and execute right in its tracks. Your enemies will be forced to turn around, or else the smokes that were once on their own will now turn into one-ways for the enemy team. Generally, the more damage and chaos a dart creates, the better. And it's what you should be aiming for with every dart. Of course, don't worry about it too much with your first dart of the round on defense, as using any dart is better than no dart. But for the rest of them, chaos is what you should be striving for. So yeah, in short for your recon bolt, don't stress too much about lineups and instead point your focus on hitting the timing right with basic but essential darts. On defense, feel free to use a dart early to get some info, and use it if you're lacking information mid-round, but on attack, make sure you always prioritize having one ready for when you're going to be executing. And now that you know more about recon darts, before we move on to Sova's drone, let's quickly get to our question of the day. Today's question is, do you think Sova will ever get changed? Personally, I think that Sova is so good in so many situations that at some point, Riot devs might take a look at his power levels and make sure he's not becoming too strong. But let us know what you think in the comment section down below. And now let's continue. Anyway, let's talk about Sova's drone, at least some tips on how to best use it. Sova's Owl drone is probably one of, if not the best abilities in the game. It is definitely very powerful, and well, it's priced accordingly, costing a whopping 400 credits. But trust us, it's so worth it, especially if you use it well. So first of all, on attacker side, the drone is a must. It can be used to clear an abundance of annoying corners, and if used right, it's essentially a player that can be traded by your teammates. You need to have a drone to clear close quarter angles, because if you don't, you'll potentially lose players early which would have easily lived otherwise. And the same thing applies for AWPers. A lot of angles can be easily dominated by AWPs, and in those types of scenarios, you need to have a drone to save your teammates from a single bullet and trip back to spawn. To give you an example, take A short on bind. People can be in the cubby close left, followed by an AWP box or top truck. Then another person is cubby close right, and then also lamps, which there's again a great amount of angles where someone can happily be waiting with a phantom or perhaps even a classic shorty or judge, all of which can kill you in a single click. Here, by simply using an ability, you can save your teammates a numerous amount of deaths, and perhaps even give them a kill instead. On defense, your drone is less important, as you're not required to take as much control or your enemies will have to push into you, not you into them. But it's still a great tool, for example, for retakes. Here, the same philosophy applies. Your teammates follow drone and you're able to clear some of the more annoying close corners. This is also one of the reasons why you shouldn't be too worried about using your recon dart on defense, because even if your enemies go for an early rush, and you're not able to refresh your recon bolt before then, you can always just drone in and it shouldn't be a big problem. But in order to use it properly and not waste it, there's a few things you should be considering before you drone. First of all, is the area you're droning really requiring of a drone, or can the same goals be easily achieved by only using a recon bolt? Then also consider if you have a Sky. Sky's dog is faster than Sova's drone, and if you don't need the extra height and vision that Sova's drone offers, well then you're simply better off using her dog instead. And finally, are you rushing? If you're rushing, the previously mentioned point matters, of course. A Sova drone isn't the fastest, so a Sky's dog is preferred. But also, you might not want to use the drone at all. Sometimes using a drone on a rush simply isn't worth it, especially with this new Brimstone meta. If you rush in but decide to drone first, it's easy for the opponents to molly you before your team can come in to actually enter the bomb site. Meaning that sometimes, especially with the small main entrance or fast rotations, droning only ends up messing up your rush instead of helping it. Simply said, it's important to consider if a drone actually helps you out, if there's a better alternative to droning, or if all your team needs from you is another gun on site. Now, a question we get a lot when it comes to drone usage is, when you're already on site and just need to play the post plant, do you still use your drone or do you save it for the next round? And honestly, that depends. In some situations, it's better to hold an angle, especially if your team is down players. But if you have the space to use some utility and the numbers are pretty even, then using the drone is a good way to kind of disable a player from participating in the retake. With the way that walls are in Valorant, there's a good chance that if somebody tags you, you can spam them if they don't respect the drone. But even if you can't get wall banged, a drone will still make them much more hesitant to peek. Now that begs the question, what about 1v1s? Do you still want to use a drone there? Well, again, it depends. Usually you don't, as you can't peek well off your drone for yourself, and all it does then is give away your position. But if your opponents already know where you are, well then it's not much of an issue and you may as well. The only danger you should watch out for then is that your opponent might start sticking the bomb as he hears you drone, since he knows you won't be able to peek at that moment, which means that they can safely half it. If that's the case, then you need to be comfortable with ping timing and peek just moments after your opponent gets pinged in order to make your drone useful for you. So in short, in 1v1s, using your drone is something you can pull off, but reserve it for select scenarios. Some other things to consider are that drone spots are generally pretty obvious, and as a Sova, you're very vulnerable while in droning form. If your enemy Sova is good, they can simply toss a shock dart at your position, which can not only do damage, but also disable your drone. Of course, the same thing can be said for Rays, but even if you aren't versing a great Sova, you can always still be flanked, so watch out where you drone from. Additionally, no matter how much we talked about the greatness of a drone, it's pretty much near useless if no teammate is following it, as the angles you clear can be lost just as fast if no one is there to take advantage of it. Really make sure that there's a teammate ready to follow it, because if there's not, it's most likely better to save it for later. Of course, there is one exception here, and that's faking. Because Sova's utility is so valuable, it's also a great tool to fake, as people don't just like throwing it away. Sometimes, people start rotating as early as they hear the drone's noise, which makes a great way to fake without sending too many players in. Without a Sova, you'd probably need at least 3 players to really convince your opponents you're headed somewhere. But with one, sometimes all you need is that drone. Let's now talk about Sova's last basic ability, which is his shock darts. The trajectory compared to the recon bolt is the same, and so are a lot of the rules. First of all, don't focus on lineups too much, especially not the super complicated double shock dart ones, as learning them oftentimes is not worth the time spent. Admittedly, learning them for common plant spots can work better in lower ranks, as people might not be expecting them as often. But if you're paying attention and are aware Sova might throw them, they're easy to avoid and only require you to sidestep for a second. A much better way to use shock bolts typically is to break utility, as it's much more consistent than trying to kill players or do damage, and the effects are not only guaranteed, but also more valuable. Getting a kill across the map with shock darts is cool, but not as consistently round winning as simply using them to break enemy utility and setups. And even if you save your shocks waiting for a good use, you can still get more kills by simply shock darting corners you already know an enemy is playing rather than gambling there somewhere beforehand. Another way to use it specifically on defense is in smokes if you feel your enemies might rush through them. A common tactic for players is to sit in the smoke and flash through, and if you expect your enemies to do just that, then a shock dart can easily do 80 to 90 damage, which needless to say is a lot. One thing to note is that on pistol rounds, most players are running around at 100 HP, and your shocks can do up to 90 if placed well. Even though buying shock darts on pistol isn't particularly popular, especially on attack where you want to get your drone, it is a great way to do a lot of damage if you manage to find people stuck in a corner or sitting in a choke. And especially in rounds like these, 90 damage is basically a kill. Now that we've covered Sova's basic abilities, let's talk about his ultimate, Hunter's Fury. His ultimate is very strong and it shows by the fact that it costs 8 ultimate orbs. For those of you who don't know how it works, Sova gets to shoot 3 beams at a very long distance that deals 80 damage and momentarily reveals any enemy's hit. Sova's ultimate is very strong for taking picks, and also for many more reasons as we'll cover as we go. First of all, you can ult to make executes a lot more difficult. If you ult long lines such as Haven C long and Bind A short, you can quite literally get multiple kills while also messing up an execute. This is probably the best type of ultimate since it not only stalls your opponents, but it also gets you kills and in most cases straight up wins you the round. But there's also other ultimates which can have good value. For example, you can ult common plant spots if you hear the planting sound, especially if the time is low. Or you can do the same thing for the defuse, although it might not be as effective if there's a lot of time to work with. And you can also run the risk of being pushed if there's multiple enemies. You can also use Sova's ultimate to kill KJ lockdowns, which are, of course, almost always a good trade, unless the Killjoy ult in itself is bad, or you have a Brimstone or a Breach that can also kill it. In fact, if you're the one in charge of breaking lockdown, you should be farming orbs as much as possible in order to not get behind. Another good ult you can use are those while your team is entering or about to enter a bomb site, as you can quickly clear corners with your ultimate, giving your team a much easier time. Or if you really want to, you can also ult in order to try and get a pick, either by droning, tagging, and then ulting, or perhaps even by blind ulting a spot you're almost certain a player will be. And if you're a new Sova player, we highly recommend you stay far away from ulting jets, raises, and also omens, at least while you're starting out. They can be very slippery and will easily escape your ultimate with their movement abilities. All in all, Sova's ultimate is very versatile and can be used as a space creator, a zoning tool, a kill tool, and also a stalling tool. It's up to you as a player to judge which style you're most comfortable with, and through experience you can build up a strong playbook of which situations you would want to use your ultimate. In fact, that is a lot of what Sova is. Sova in a way is experience, and experience on Valorant translates very well to a higher level of Sova gameplay. We can guarantee that including all of these tips in your gameplay will highly improve your Sova game. But you won't be a Sova god overnight. That'll take experience and plenty of it. You'll discover new things, start to abuse them, and get better and better, and that's what Sova is all about. In order to be a good Sova, you need to understand your abilities. But there's also some things you should know. Sova definitely isn't the easiest agent. You are always leading the execute and you can really make or break your duelist chances of getting openings. Sure, you can play Phil and just hope that you get a smurf on your team, or you can start to main Sova and make every duelist you get look like a smurf with really good support. Sova is probably one of, if not the most impactful agent in the team, and definitely the biggest support. A good Sova will make entering easy and lead them to success. But in order to play Sova, you should not have an ego. If you're doing really well, you won't have many kills. And only if you fail or your teammates troll you will you be called on to start killing them as well. Remember that you need to be where the action is, and you should be the first to rotate all the time. Try to impact the map everywhere you go. Find out what your opponents are up to on defense to give your teammates an easier time to hold their bomb sites. A bad Sova, on the other hand, is constantly playing around with their recon dart in hand, trying to recall whatever weird new lineup they just learned. They're more concerned with building a database of lineups than they are with learning the proper timings, and they don't understand that they need to stay alive in order to support their teammates. Sure, on defense you can get kills by using good utility for yourself and cheesing away kills, but on attack you won't be fragging much unless you're constantly winning the clutch. Don't let this get to you, and whatever you do, don't try to be a hero and get the first pick. Dying first is about the worst thing you can do, and it's how easily you throw the game for the rest of your team. Well guys, that's gonna wrap it up for now. Hopefully you enjoyed this in-depth Sova guide, and you can use it to better play the agent in ranked. Make sure to hit that like and subscribe, and don't forget to ring that notification bell. If you want more tips to become an even better Sova player, make sure to check out ProGuides.com. We'll see you guys soon.